Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thanks for coming along on the journey of this show that we started over a year ago, and we designed it to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig, he is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Thom. It's good to hear you, as always. Looking forward to today's guest. I've known Paul for a long time.
So you've known a lot of our guests for a long time, and it's always fun for me to kind of come along on the ride as you guys talk about the history of what you've seen happen around this digital enterprise. So today's going to be one of those days, because every single week, Craig and I, we try to bring to this show interesting interviews that are going to help all of the listeners enhance and grow their careers. And so today we have Paul Nelson, and he is the Chief Technical Strategist for Next Generation Digital Engineering Group with Northrop Grumman's Enterprise Services. That is a lot of words. So Paul Nelson, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thanks, Thom, and thanks, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So we're glad to have you, and we're going to talk a little bit about partnerships, about digital strategy. But first, Paul, could you please tell us a little bit about your background, where you started, and then what you do now in this enterprise services group at Northrop Grumman?
Sure, Thom. Yeah, I mean, I've just had the funnest journey in my career. So I am a Texan, Thom.
Nice.
Born and bred, loud and proud, just like you.
That's what we like. Well, I was born in California, but I've lived in Austin for 30 years. So.
Well, there you go. So I was born in Dallas, grew up in Houston, spent a couple years in Siberia in Russia, learned Russian, and did a bachelor's and master's in mechanical engineering, and was always heavy on the software side. I really fell in love with this digitalization of product development very early in my education cycle, and went to work in St. Louis at Boeing's military headquarters, implementing all kinds of digital technologies across F-18, and spent a couple of years back in Houston on the space station program. And I found my way out to Utah for work, and went to work for ATK doing rocket propulsion. And that became Orbital ATK, and then Orbital ATK was acquired by Northrop Grumman. And I now work out of Northrop Grumman's headquarters in Falls Church, Virginia. Although I'm a virtual, I still live in northern Utah, and just have been traveling more until COVID hit. We'll talk about that a little, I'm sure, too. And so now I get this privilege of working. I mean, Northrop Grumman is a fantastic company. We've got 90,000 employees. We are hiring like mad. We're growing like crazy. It's just, we are a pioneering company. We take the hardest problems there are in the world and we go solve them. Whether that's in the space arena or the defense arena, we're really about securing our nation and bettering humanity, right? Really helping to drive us forward with exploration of deep space and all sorts of fun projects. And I sit in a position where I get a look across the whole company and help guide our digital transformation efforts across Northrop Grumman, across this gigantic enterprise of 90,000 people. And it's every day I am learning every day, and it is tough. It's a tough assignment, and I'm getting stretched and really enjoying it, though. It's a lot of fun.
So, Paul, it's great to hear your voice. And we spent some time a couple of weeks ago catching up, and we should explain to the audience, we've known each other for a long time. But sometimes when partnerships form, people are curious, well, what was the catalyst? How did that happen? Do you remember the first time we met, and what were you thinking when we were starting to talk together?
Yeah, great question. So at the time, I was working for ATK, relatively little company, 12 to 14,000 employees. This was what it probably been, 2009 is my guess, Craig. Probably.
I think you're right. It's about then.
About then, and there's a through actually PLM World, there was a working group called the Aerospace Special Interest Group that evolved into the Aerospace Working Group, the AWG, that is still running under the Digital Enterprise Society today. And that group brings together a lot of folks from the aerospace and defense community. But interestingly, both Ford and General Motors made their way into that group as a way to collaborate in a non-competitive forum. And Ford wasn't as active as General Motors, so General Motors was always more active there. And so we met in this cross-industry group, which was a great group. I mean, you got, even though I compete head-to-head with Boeing and Lockheed and what is now L3 Harris and other aerospace and defense companies. On one hand, we're competitors, but then as soon as somebody wins a program, we're subcontracting to one another and we're partners. And so it's amazing how it's a co-opetition environment. We very much work hand in hand to deliver what's needed for the nation in many respects to help defend the country. And so we met in that forum, and at my time, I was a fairly small company, and I was thinking, man, how do I align my agenda with GM's who has more licensing leverage over these software vendors than I do? And so I had an agenda building a partnership with you guys.
Okay, so you had a motivation, and my motivation was one of surely we don't have to do this alone, and so partly benchmarking. I wanted to know what other people are doing, especially high-tech generated people. And while you're not driven by a commercial market, you're driven by something else. I wanted to compare that. And then, I was there largely to talk to Boeing, right? They're the other big dog. It was interesting. And then what I found out, we were doing one of our sessions where we talk about what version of tools we're on and what other things we're doing. And you guys at ATK and the guys at the Jet Propulsion Lab, so very different kinds of businesses, had a tool chain that was almost identical to mine, right, at General Motors. And so it was team center based, what PLM World was all about. And I really wanted to talk to people that had a similar footprint of tools and thus the same challenges. And then if my, company's size can help all three of us, well, so much the better. So Jim Stuckey, who Jim retired at the same time I did, and he encouraged me. And Jim, if you're out there listening, I hope you're smiling. But between the two of you, ATK and JPL, we ended up doing a lot of benchmarking. We visited you guys with our methods team and executive. You guys came to Detroit. I taught you about pothole number 3. We did not break the truck, but not that we didn't try. But in any case, I was interested in what ATK was doing for physical testing, evaluating a physical test sample, and then how quickly you could learn from that and apply it back to a simulation results. And it was impressive. We got invited out. You guys were the host at one of your test firing. And of course, just the rumble and the smoke. And I'm an aerospace engineer, so I missed my calling. But anyways, it was interesting to see it. And we went back to the conference room, and I asked your lead simulation guy, so how soon can you get a correlation of the physical run we just saw an hour earlier to the analytical results that you do in simulation? And he pulled it up in real time. And I turned to my team and said, you see, there's no excuse. It took us weeks, like 10 weeks to take a field test results and turn them into a correlation study. And I was impressed. So that's how I knew we had the right team. And then, the great thing about forming partnerships is if you can find the mutual interest. Ours was the tool chain. We each had a different motivation, benchmarking versus influence. And then you especially, and I really love your enthusiasm, you proposed other things that you and I did over the years at PLM World. We We did some system engineering thing. We did some strategic PLM planning thing. And so I thought it was kind of cool. And, what surprised you in our relationship? Did something just knock your socks off? I told you about my correlation response time. I was impressed, right? What about it from your point of view? Did you see something that really helped in the partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. And you made some good points there, Craig, just to comment back and then I'll answer your question.
Okay.
I think the partnerships are all about, these are complex problems we're trying to solve, and nobody wants to solve an incredibly complex problem alone. So when we can shamelessly steal from each other, we should. And especially these partnerships, I think, between an aerospace company and an automotive company were especially fruitful because your cars are too slow compared to our rockets. Like, we didn't compete at all.
Yeah, but ours last for more than 60 seconds.
That's true. Okay.
Keep going.
But I think that just that shared risk reduction, right? That ability to look at a complex problem together and get another vantage point on the same, like you said, it's a similar tool chain. While we have differences in product development, I'm more engineer to order, definitely lower rate than you are in automotive. There's still a lot of, I'm amazed. I was always shocked almost, Craig, that we could go into a meeting and have an all-day benchmarking meeting and just be talking apples to apples. And sometimes I think we convince ourselves we're really different across industries, but at the end of the day, it's product development, right? So how different are you really? One specific example that was a huge win for us with General Motors, we were struggling at the time with our electrical mechanical correlation. And we were using NX for mechanical design. And how did that get correlated to our cable harnessing, which we were doing in Zuken at the time for this particular business unit? And we came to you guys and we said, hey, GM, we're doing a lot of this manually. We're running garden hoses through physical prototype labs. We got to do this digitally. We need to do this smarter. What can we do? And you guys said, hey, just coincidentally, next week on WebEx, we're having a training on how we do electrical mechanical handoffs. And and you should just come to our GM training. And we were like, awesome. And we brought a team of 10 people to a General Motors training on electrical cable harnessing. And we took that information and we even came back, and you guys were doing at the time, this was years ago, 5-6 years ago.
Right.
At the time, General Motors was kind of taking that electrical logical input and throwing it over the wall to mechanical to do the geometric routing of the cable harnessing. And we took that training, which you guys gave us this infusion of a head start. It would have taken us a year to reinvent on our own. And then we took that, further developed it with a closed loop feedback from mechanical back. So after we routed, we would feed that back into electrical to check the voltage drops to make sure that everything was closed looped. And we ended up sharing that back to GM. And you guys were like, this is awesome. Like, we taught you, now you're teaching us. And I just thought that was a good example of one of these partnerships that you plant a little seed and you're not sure if it's going to go anywhere, but then it bears this fruit that we shut down $1 million physical prototyping lab as a result of that partnership. We got the biggest company awards and kudos, and we're like, you guys, all we did was steal it from General Motors. It was awesome, right?
Yeah, you didn't steal it. We gave it willingly. You borrowed it.
We borrowed
and the truth is, we both gave requirements to the different wiring vendors, one of which is now part of Siemens, right? The guys at Mentor, and those folks. I don't want this to be an advertisement, but what they've done with capital and how that's expanding within the Siemens tool suite, this same influence, right? How does mechanical routing comprehend, even react to electrical needs, right? And the feature allocation. So that's really interesting. That brings up Siemens or Unigraphics. We both use them a lot, not just for PDM, but also for design. We use some of their simulation tools. We together put together requirements. Some of those requirements were about simulation data management, which has now got a different name. I think the vendors, and this is my comment to all of you out there listening, is you'd be surprised, but the vendors by and large like this. They love people getting together and commonizing on requirements. Or if we can't agree on a requirement, why are we different? What drives a car company in a different direction than a rocket company? So what would you take away, Paul, from our interactions? Many of them were in the aerospace working group with people like Siemens. Did you sense something that really paid off in the partnership?
Yeah, and I think that's a multi-dimensional partnership. I think that it wasn't about us in industry ganging up on Siemens. It was about them having an equal seat at the table, right? And sitting down together and saying, look, guys, there's complexity here, and we have risk here. We have risk to deliver on cost, on schedule, a technically compliant product. How can we help mitigate that risk? And then we'd get into the specifics, whether it was electrical, mechanical, or systems engineering, or simulation, or software, or manufacturing. We'd go topic by topic and start to tackle some of those big risk items. And I just really appreciated. I think it takes a special partner to be able to sit down and not feel, when you get 10 companies or 20 companies in a room, and the common denominator there is your digital tool or your digital capability and solution, it by definition can almost feel like you're getting ganged up on. Mm-hmm. And Siemens never really did. They never really reacted that way. And it was never intended that way either, of course. Right. But I think they did a good job of just sitting down at the table together and all working on it together. They listen, right? I think that's one thing that I've really been impressed with Siemens is they listen, they incorporate, and then they respond, right?
Yeah. I was reminded as we were talking there, we've been in different forums. A lot of them are public, a couple are not public. But the one interesting relationship that I remember most that involved Siemens was the other Siemens divisions. So Siemens Medical used to have a guy on the board of directors for PLM World. And even the Siemens Energy folks, so they do turbines, right? When they got more involved with us as these different partnerships, they were just impressed that we had a forum like your company and mine talking about how to improve simulation automation, right? And they were quite happy. And so here you got a division of the big Siemens, the old Siemens, the Siemens that does power generation, right? Using the same tools they acquired through the Unigraphics acquisition. And they were really, really thankful that we had done this. And in fact, they became an active member of partnerships that, as I understand it, continue to this day. So that's a really interesting development.
And even now that they're being divested from the mothership Siemens, those partnerships continue.
Well, and I think energy production, their turbines, of course, are fired by natural gas, but even the site of their company, I don't know if this is part of that divestiture or not, but the turbines, the wind turbines, folks. So there's a gearbox down in there that's pretty good to do well. Needs a lot of efficiency gains, but in any case, now Paul, I want to move to a slightly different topic. So as I got to know you, I found out you were an intern at General Motors, and I'm like, no kidding. How the heck did we let you get away? And I don't recall that story, but what I wanted you to share from internship to your current position, you've been in a lot of different environments, some small, some large. What's it feel like? You and I are not the same generation. You're a generation behind me. So there's another generation coming out now that's, a generation younger than you, or we'll say a generation's 20 years difference, right? Tell them what it felt like, and tell them why you did it. Was it just you were always anxious, or did you do it because you were opportunistic?
No, so I don't. So I did an internship in the design center. So I was with all the artists at General Motors as an engineer. So that was very different, right? my union experience, I have some incredible union stories that that we could
this
talk
is not
about.
a show looking for union sponsorship, but
No,
maybe we should move on.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. Just some very intriguing perspectives. It's just eye-opening for me to see some of these different vantage points, right? And I did consider going back into automotive. I went back to school, and I also did a lot of wasn't an internship, but funded work for Pratt and Whitney, doing flow path generation and NX of 2D flow paths revolved into 3D jet engines, parametric design type activity. And I really fell in love with this digital journey, though, right? And I've always loved, I mean, as a kid, my dad wrote a song about me when I was 3 years old, launching rockets into space. And I'm just to go be a rocket scientist and light off these giant Roman candles in the desert at test events. Like, there's just nothing better than feeling the ground rumble and seeing a payload get sent to another planet. I can't get enough of it. I love it. And there's always been this very interesting relationship between space exploration and defense. You look at how all of our Apollo missions grew out of intercontinental ballistic work, missile work, right? And so there's always been a synergy there between the defense and the space side. And I'm proud of our nation. I love to defend our nation, and I've not served in the military, but I'm super grateful for those that do. And so it's been a very interesting journey. I think that I'm a family man. I've got 5 kids, and most of my career transitions were not triggered by wanting to jump to something new or shiny, but more making sure I had a good situation for my family. And I loved what I was doing in St. Louis. But when you start traveling 70% of the time with young kids, it triggered a change. And that's why I jumped over to ATK. I think I like hard problems. I must be a sadist or something. I think part of going into
just an engineer. We're the really good engineers like hard problems.
Okay? Maybe I'm a good engineer. There you go. And but I looked at the automotive challenge. This was before autonomous driving, and I thought that problem's almost too easy. I want to go work in 3-dimensional space and outer space, and so that kind of drew me towards the aerospace world. Was that challenge? Now with autonomous driving, I think you guys have more complexity. You hear Elon Musk talk about getting SpaceX going versus getting Tesla going, and he'll say that the Tesla challenge was by far harder than starting a rocket company, right?
Yeah, it's not cost plus fixed fee contracts. It's actually sell something you want to buy.
And we're not cost plus. I mean, that whole landscape has changed. Almost everything is firm fixed price now. So it's a different landscape than it was 10 years ago, right? 8 years ago. So that's an interesting.
Did Musk cause that? Did Elon cause that, or
he definitely did in the launch
smarter
business. He did that in the launch business. I mean, I believe the most innovative thing SpaceX has done is their business model. Now, whether it's sustainable or not, will they achieve the volume of launches they need annually to? There's still jury's still out a little bit there, but it is I mean, it is very innovative what they've done from a business model perspective.
So you did these changes for the stability of your family. That's admirable. I think that's great, actually. But what about as you guys got acquired? You got acquired twice, right? Orbital Sciences, which is a different story, and then Northrop Grumman. Has that helped or hurt the partnerships, or was it something they really liked, the fact that these partnerships exist?
Yeah, no, definitely different perspectives. And those were not family-driven changes, like you said. Those are just almost serendipitous, right? Because ATK actually bought Orbital Sciences, but the ATK CEO left. We spun out a sporting goods division, and then the CEO of Orbital took over the company. And brilliant guy, Dave Thompson. I've been so impressed with him. I mean, he's the original Elon Musk, the first guy in the 80s, started a commercial space venture with Orbital Sciences, but very much different perspectives. Here's Orbital, a 3,000 person company merging with ATK, about 9,000 people that didn't spin out with the sporting group goods division. And they brought this almost like, I think after the Challenger disaster with ATK, the culture became very risk adverse, understandably.
Sure.
Right?
Right.
And here you have this startup that is the opposite of risk aversion. They're doing the Pegasus air launch platform, and they're taking bets left and right, and they're lean and mean and agile in a lot of ways. And that culture got infused through that Orbital ATK merger. And now I'm watching that culture get infused across Northrop Grumman. We reorganized this year to spread Orbital ATK out throughout the company.
Interesting.
And you see that kind of mantra of be agile, be lean and mean. Don't get stuck in a bureaucratic rut. I see that get infused throughout the company, and it is, while it definitely feels different. I mean, I think Orbital ATK at about 9 or 10% classified programs, and a lot of commercial activity for a 15,000 person company to a 90,000 person company that is 50, 60+% classified programs. It's a very different culture. And I always, even when you move from Houston to Utah to St. Louis to Russia, cultures are different wherever you go, in a company or in a place. And I don't think cultures are good or bad. I just think they're different. Yeah. And I think you got to learn to appreciate the differences. And with those same, to get back to your question, Craig, with those same perspective differences, there were differences on partnership. What does it mean to be a partner? And that has evolved under those different vantage points. And some ways good and some ways not as good, right? So I think there's trade-offs there as well. But
well, speaking of a trade-off, retirement, stopping working full-time, which I started about 1.5 years ago, has in fact led to partnerships dissolving, partly because I'm not an active influencer. I don't want to be, is the truth. And another part of it is because I'm not issuing contracts for tens of millions of dollars, and so a vendor is not likely to listen. Now, it's interesting doing podcasts. People still want to know. Well, I'm over 60. People want to know. Well, what were we thinking when we created this digital world? Well, a lot of what we're thinking has been accomplished, right? So what's coming next is a little more interesting to me. And I do miss the partnership, the camaraderie. I think the last time you and I met professionally was probably January of 2019. And, that just seems like yesterday to me. To you, it probably seems like, eons ago, because a lot of things have changed. We've been talking about that last change. And you and I, we run into each other at Realize Live or whatever. And I asked you at the time, well, how you doing? And you mentioned, well, I'm traveling an awful lot, and it wasn't what I was intended, and a point about family and so on. Well, then the pandemic hit in March, and we all stopped traveling. How's it affected your work life and your personal life? I'm just curious. You're still the strategist, but you got a room full of monitors. We get to see what your office looks like there. Tell us about your life now. What's COVID done for it? Is it good, bad, just is?
Yeah, it's definitely different. And I was traveling way too much. So it's nice to not be traveling, to be home. I enjoy that. And I think there's needed travel where you've got to build the relationship, and face-to-face can't be replaced. And then there's just travel because someone wants you there, but you could have had the meeting virtually, right? So I think it's a mixed mixed bag there. So,
are you able to get your job done though from a remote site?
I've always been able to work from anywhere virtually very effectively. My meeting volume and email volume are both up about 40%. And so that's, I'm longer hours in some senses, but I'm more effective hours. If you think about it, I'm still working 60 plus hours a week, but I'm not traveling in some of those hours. So they're all work hours, right? They're not any sitting in an airport. And so that's been good.
It's good to catch up with you. As I expected, we'll run long because you and I enjoyed chatting with each other. We hope the audience has enjoyed it, but it's time for me to pass it back to Thom.
Yeah, well, before we actually go, though, there was something you guys said early on I want to dive a little deeper with, both with Paul and maybe with you, Craig. You guys early on told the story of, Paul, your company kind of coming to GM and then saying, oh, come to our internal training. And then you took what you learned, you took it back, and you took it even farther, and then you gave it back to GM. You guys kind of breezed past that story, but that's actually a nugget of, I think, things people don't look for. I think so often we're scared inside companies that we have to keep everything really tight to us because we wouldn't want our competitors to know, that we don't even share it with people who aren't competitors. So can we talk a little bit more for the people who are listening? How can companies find ways to partner that are going to have that benefit?
I think that you definitely, I mean, even with these collaborations with General Motors, it's a little bit of work, but we went and signed a non-disclosure agreement or a proprietary information agreement to make sure we were covered, right? That what we exchanged would be mutually protected, that it wouldn't get out into the wild, so to speak. And so I think that if you go to an nth degree where you're getting into process best practice and things that may be part of your secret sauce, I think you do have to do some, at least, very high level legal protection there. But generally, I think you're right, Thom, that I think people are afraid that, well, I can't talk openly about that. And I guess that would be the message, is challenge yourself. Why can't you? Right? Why? I mean, for me, the way I think of it is, I'm not in the business of making a CAD system or an MES system or an ERP system. I want to make rockets and satellites and airplanes. And if if collaborating on that enabler helps me build an airplane faster, I'm going to do that, right? I'm going to go have that conversation because there's a layer there that's just a common denominator to everybody.
Yeah, that last point's a really good one, Paul. That you just find the common denominator, and even when two competitors are talking, commercial tools is a common denominator. We want the commercial tool vendor to be successful. It in a competitive sense, it levels the playing field. We won't beat each other on that dimension. We'll beat it on some other technology we put in our product. So finding the common denominator is key. And some of the vendors, Siemens is a good example, they actually encourage it because it makes their job a little easier in building the tools. Now, they always suspect that, and it's been interesting, I've debated with a lot of their executives about, well, an aerospace company has different parameters than a car company. Well, sure, it's a volume thing is part of that, right? But I think they kind of miss the point that managing simulation data, well, that's not a competitive advantage. That's just a necessary thing to do your job well, right? So find those necessary things, see where your interest, and then every now and then you're going to be really surprised, whether it's a wiring harness routing or even the dynamics of airbags. But that's a topic for another day. You got to remember, an airbag's got a little rocket motor in it. Everybody listening, and you'll put two and two together, you'll figure it out.
I still share that perspective, Craig. It's interesting in my new world. The DoD in mid-2018 released a digital engineering strategy.
Yeah.
And they're now starting to make part of their contracting digital engineering capabilities. And so now people are starting to bristle a little bit and say, well, is that I still have the perspective that, if we're really going to be successful, we're all in that together. And 80% of that digital engineering landscape are commercial providers. And so we still need to align there. And so I think that there's a balancing act in there, but it is interesting that some are starting to think, well, no, that's a competitive differentiator. And I'm like, is it? Maybe it is.
If tools are, then you're not a leader. You're not like you guys or the guys at SpaceX, right? You're not a leader if you're saying it's a competitive advantage, because it's really simple, everybody. It's a commercial tool. Anybody could buy it. Paul and Craig could go start Paul and Craig Incorporated and buy the tools, right? And if we're more agile, we would be because we're smaller. we might just pull something off. So that's the thing to remind your leadership at your companies is if you think commercial tools are a competitive advantage, you've got another think coming. You got to really consider that, right? They are an enabler to enable your workforce to not spend time building tools when you can buy them. You should buy them if you can buy them, right? The only place to build your own tools is where it's really a competitive advantage.
Well
said, Greg.
I definitely thought that was something we needed to go back to, because I think too many companies that I've seen and too many individuals want to keep everything like really, really tight to their vest. And I loved that story of how you shared that information.
You know, Thom, to be really honest with everybody, it's easier talking to a non-competitor than talking to the guys across town here in Detroit. And Paul knows the story. I mean, the us and Ford and Fiat, we would chat, but it would be a lot more careful discussion for exactly those reasons. To take that fear, then apply it to every relationship, it's just a little misguided. Yeah, put an NDA in place, but you'd be surprised how many of the problems are the same. And now that I'm a part-time consultant in the last years of my career, I still see people with the same, oh, we can't do that. We can't share that with an OEM, or we can't share it with another tier one. And I'm like, it's not a competitive advantage. Why wouldn't you? Right?
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Paul.
One other point there that I think for our early career folks that often gets overlooked too, is they come in and they're hit with this wave of baked process and how we do product development right now today. And they maybe don't realize at first glance that existing process and approach is riddled with problems. And there is all kinds of opportunity for improvement. And so sometimes I'm amazed. I'm so impressed with some of our early career hires at Northrop Grumman, and they come in and just ask these insightful, poignant questions like,
why?
Does it make sense to do it this way? Like, why are we doing this? And I think that's the other takeaway from that, is that this continuous improvement journey, that this search for the holy grail of product development, the Iron Man Jarvis suite, if you will, to make it easier to build a product. I think that sometimes we assume it's done, and it's not even close to done. And I think just not accepting the status quo, I think just you got to be challenging in that, I think.
Yep. And I'll leave it with this. I think this goes beyond engineering, and I think it goes into all areas of our life. When we don't hold everything close to the vest and we can be transparent and we can share and learn from each other, I think that's when the real growth happens. So,
and we need it, especially now, given all the other challenges we have going on. We just need to bridge to each other, help out, and keep an open mind, willing to learn, regardless
Absolutely.
of your age.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And thank you.
Thanks again, Paul. It's good to hear your voice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And hey, thanks to everybody who joined in, because we're going to be here every single week. And you want to tune in, because we're going to have more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.